I'll never forget that day. Not because of what was said, but because of how quiet it was after. You ever have a moment in life so sharp, so final, that the world seems to go still for a second? That's what it felt like. It was late afternoon, mid-October. The Texas sun had just started dipping low, throwing those long orange shadows across their neat little suburban yard. I was standing there on the front porch of my daughter's house, a house I helped her buy, by the way, holding a small box of old toys I'd brought for my grandson. And then my son-in-law, Brian, looked me dead in the eye and said it. "Frank, you need to stay out of our business. You're not part of this family anymore." I swear I felt my chest tighten like someone had just slammed a door inside my heart. For a second, I thought I'd misheard him. The man actually said it like he was reading a grocery list. Calm, casual, cold as ice. No hesitation. No mercy. Behind him, my daughter Claire stood frozen near the doorway, her arms crossed over her chest like she was holding herself together. She couldn't even meet my eyes. I remember the smell of cut grass, the sound of a neighbor's dog barking somewhere down the street, and the way my hand shook around that cardboard box. Inside were a few little things. A wooden train I carved years ago, a baseball glove from when Claire was a kid, and a photo frame I'd fixed for my grandson's room. Nothing fancy, just a bit of a grandfather trying to stay part of his family's life. But to Brian, I was interfering. He had this smug look on his face, that kind of expression city guys wear when they think they've got it all figured out. Ironed shirt, clean shave, hands that hadn't seen a day of real work. I wanted to tell him, "You wouldn't last a week doing what I did for 30 years. But I didn't, because that's not who I am. See, I wasn't some bitter old man trying to boss my daughter around. I was a father, one who'd spent his entire life working with his hands, building homes for other people while dreaming of a better one for my own kid. I built that girl's future, brick by brick. I fixed roofs in the dead of summer. I worked 12-hour days, came home smelling like dust and sawdust, just so she could go to college, and now here I was, being told I wasn't part of the family. It's funny how fast life flips on you. One argument, one misunderstanding, and suddenly, you're the villain in a story you helped write. I remember the argument that led to it. It wasn't even a big one, at least not in the beginning. A week before that day, I'd dropped by unannounced. Claire had sounded upset on the phone, so I brought over dinner, a casserole, her mom's old recipe. I thought maybe she could use the company. Brian didn't like that. Said I should have called first, said it was their space and I was crossing boundaries. I tried to laugh it off, told him I wasn't planning to move in, but he wasn't joking. His jaw tightened, his tone turned sharp. He didn't want me around unless invited. I thought maybe he was just having a bad day, but when I left that night, I caught him whispering something to Claire by the door, and she looked scared. That look, I can't forget it. A few days later, I came back just to drop off some things for my grandson. That's when it happened. That's when Brian finally decided he'd had enough. I can still see his stance. One hand on the doorframe, the other in his pocket like he owned the place. Like I was some stranger trying to sell vacuum cleaners. "Frank," he said, his voice calm but sharp, "you need to stay out of our business. You're not part of this family anymore." Every word landed like a hammer to my chest. I glanced at Claire. She flinched, then looked down at the floor. Not a word came out of her. I said, "Claire, you're really okay with this?" Her lip trembled. "Dad, please." "Just go for now. We'll talk later." Later. That word hurt worse than anything, because I knew later meant never. I wanted to shout, to ask how she could stand by and let this man talk to her father that way. But then I remembered something my late wife, Susan, used to say, "You can't win a fight with someone who's already decided they're right," so I took a deep breath, tried to hold back the anger. My hands were shaking, not from weakness, from everything I wanted to say but didn't. I looked Brian dead in the eye. "You got a lot of nerve, son," he smirked. "I'm just setting boundaries." "Boundaries?" I said, my voice cracking a bit. "That's what you call cutting a father out of his daughter's life?" He shrugged, cool as ice. "Call it whatever you want. Just stay out." I took a long look at my daughter, her eyes glistening, her body still. And in that moment, I realized something. She wasn't just scared of losing him. She was scared of choosing me. So I did what any broken man does when pride and pain collide. I nodded slowly, stepped off that porch and said, "You'll regret saying that." Then I turned around, walked to my old Chevy Silverado, tossed that box of toys on the passenger seat, and drove off. The drive home felt endless. The air was heavy, like the whole world was pressing down on me. I didn't even turn on the radio. Just listened to the hum of the tires and the sound of my own breathing. When I reached the stoplight at the end of their street, I looked in the rearview mirror. Their house was getting smaller, the roofline fading behind a line of oak trees. And right then I whispered, not out of rage, not even out of hate, but out of something colder. Something quiet. "You'll regret ever pushing me out." It wasn't a threat. It was a promise, to myself. Because deep down I knew men like Brian always bury their own downfall. They get too comfortable, too confident, too proud to notice the cracks forming beneath their own feet. And me? I've spent my life fixing cracks so I'd wait, watch. And when the time came, I'd show him what real strength looks like. Not loud, not angry, but patient and unshakable. That night, I sat alone in my kitchen. The same table I'd built years ago for Susan. Her chair was still there, empty across from me. I poured myself a glass of whiskey, not to drown the pain, just to taste something that burned worse than what I felt inside. The house was quiet, except for the old clock ticking above the fridge. Every tick felt like it was counting down to something. I didn't know what yet, but I could feel it. I stared at that box of toys sitting by the door unopened. The little train, the glove, the picture frame, and all the pieces of a life I wasn't allowed to be part of anymore, and I thought about every moment I'd worked for that. Family, every roof I'd built, under the Texas sun, every scraped knuckle, every sleepless night, all so that my daughter could have a life better than mine. And now some man, some outsider was telling me I didn't belong. I took another sip, leaned back in my chair and whispered again, this time slower. "You'll regret it. Brian, you'll regret it when you see what real family means." It wasn't about revenge then, not yet. It was about something deeper, the ache of being cast out by the very people you'd die for. But life has a way of turning pain into plans, and that night, without even realizing it, I'd started mine. For most of my life, folks called me a fix-it guy. You name it, I could fix it. Roofs, fences, engines, you name it. I wasn't born rich, never even close. But I had 2 good hands, a strong back, and a stubborn heart that didn't quit. For 25 years, I worked construction down in Austin, Texas. Framed houses from the ground up, patched up barns, fixed old porches that had been eaten half by termites. I'd come home tired, sore, and sunburned most days. But proud because everything I did for my family, for Susan, my wife, and for our little girl. Claire. Susan and I met back in '89 at a small-town diner just outside San Marcos. She was a waitress, and I was just another broke contractor trying to make a name for himself. She had this smile, warm, kind, like summer sunlight after a storm. She believed in me before anyone else did. And for the next 3 decades, that woman stood beside me through every hard winter, every failed project, every time the bill stacked higher than the paycheck. When she got sick, cancer, stage 4, it came out of nowhere. One day she was laughing, folding laundry. The next she was sitting in a doctor's office with that look, the kind you never forget. I spent every ounce of savings I had on treatments, built ramps for her wheelchair myself, stayed up every night beside her hospital bed reading old letters she'd written me when we were kids. And then one day in 2017, she was just gone, just like that. When you lose someone like that, the house doesn't feel like a home anymore. Every corner echoes. Every smell reminds you of what's missing. After the funeral, I didn't leave the house for weeks. Didn't talk much either. It was Claire who pulled me through. She'd come by after work, bring me food, make me coffee, tidy up. She was all I had left. My only reason to get up in the morning. So I made a decision. If Susan wasn't around to protect her anymore, then it was my job to make damn sure Claire had the best life possible. When she told me she wanted to buy her first home, I didn't even hesitate. I co-signed the loan, helped with the down payment, spent weekends fixing it up myself, sanded the floors, painted the walls, even built her a porch, swing out back just like the one her mama used to love. She was happy then. We were happy then. And then she met him, Brian. Even, the name still leaves a bitter taste in my mouth. He was from Houston, The kind of man who measured success by the shine of his shoes. Clean-cut, polished, always talking about networking and strategy. I remember the first time she brought him over. It was a Sunday barbecue. I'd grilled ribs, baked beans, the whole deal. He showed up in a pressed white shirt and loafers. Loafers. At a Texas barbecue. When I reached out my hand, he gave me one of those weak handshakes, the kind where the other guy doesn't squeeze back. I knew right then he wasn't built like me. He smiled a lot, but it never reached his eyes. You know the type, all teeth, no warmth. He said things like, "So you're in manual labor, Mr. Delaney? That's admirable. Manual labor. Like it was some kind of charity work." I just chuckled, wiped my hands on my apron and said, "Yeah, son. I build things that last longer than conversations like this." He didn't laugh. At first, I figured maybe he was just nervous, meeting the father-in-law and all. I gave him a fair chance, I told myself. He's young, maybe he'll grow up, learn some respect, but over time, his arrogance started leaking through like a bad roof after a storm. He'd mock the way I talked, called me cowboy like it was some sort of joke. He'd roll his eyes when I offered to help fix things around their house. Said he'd hire professionals. Thing is, I was the professional. I'd built more homes than he'd ever stepped foot in, but I bit my tongue. Every time. Because I didn't want to make life hard for Claire. I just kept thinking, if she's happy, that's what matters. Then she got pregnant. And I'll be honest, and I cried that day, first grandkid. A little piece of Susan coming back into the world. I told Claire I'd build the nursery myself. She smiled, said that'd be perfect. But Brian, he didn't look too thrilled. Said I was taking over. Said he didn't want anyone interfering with his plans for the baby's room. I tried to keep my cool. "I'm just trying to help, son." He replied, "We don't need help. We need space." Those words stuck to me like a splinter. Still, I let it go. I told myself I'd back off, just give them time. But the more I stepped back, the further Claire drifted. She'd stopped calling as much. Visits turned into quick drop-ins. When I did come by, Brian was always there, watching, listening, making sure I didn't say too much. The house that used to feel like ours started to feel like enemy territory. One night, maybe 6 months before everything blew up, Claire came over alone. She looked tired, worn out. We sat on the porch just like we used to when she was little. She said, "Dad, sometimes I feel like Brian's not listening to me anymore." I tried to keep my voice steady. "You okay, sweetheart?" She nodded, but her eyes said no. Then she added, "He says I spend too much time with you, that I let you influence our marriage." That one hurt. Not because she said it, but because I could tell she believed it a little. I just said quietly, "You'll always be my daughter. I'll never stop caring, but I'll stay out of your way if that's what keeps you happy." She started to cry. Hugged me. Said she was sorry. I told her, "Don't you ever apologize for being loved." That was the last real conversation we had before everything changed. After that, it was small things, tiny moments that piled up, until they crushed what little piece we had left, a Thanksgiving. Invitation that got lost, a Christmas. Gift I dropped off that wasn't necessary. A family picture I wasn't in because the frame only fit 4. Each time, I told myself not to take it personally, but deep down, I could feel it. The distance. The warmth that once filled my daughter's eyes when she saw me was replaced by hesitation. And every time Brian stood beside her, I could see it. That subtle smirk. That invisible wall he built between us, he was winning. It wasn't until after my grandson was born that things got truly bad. I'd stopped by one afternoon with a few baby clothes and a hand-carved rocking horse I'd spent 2 weeks working on. The kind Susan always wanted me to make someday. Brian answered the door. Didn't even say hello. "Frank," he said, "we talked about this. You can't just show up unannounced." I looked past him, saw Claire in the kitchen holding the baby. She smiled weakly but didn't say a word. "I just came to drop this off," I said, lifting the horse. "Made it myself." He looked at it like it was a piece of junk. "We already have one. Store-bought." I wanted to shove that horse right back at him, but I just nodded and set it down. "All right, son. Take care of them." And I left. I remember walking back to my truck, my boots crunching against the gravel. The air was thick, one of those humid Texas afternoons that make you feel heavy inside and out. And I knew then something had broken between us. Maybe for good. I started hearing less and less from Claire after that. Texts went unanswered. Calls went straight to voicemail. And then came that day, the day on the porch, when Brian finally said what he'd been meaning all along, that I wasn't part of their family anymore. That was the day something inside me shifted. It wasn't rage. Rage burns out fast. This was colder, quieter, like steel setting in concrete. See, when a man like me spends his life building things, he learns something important. Nothing breaks overnight. Cracks start small. Hairline fractures. But once they spread, the whole damn thing comes down. Brian thought he'd built a perfect life, clean, modern, untouchable. He didn't know that under the surface he'd already started the collapse himself. And me? I wasn't planning on revenge, and not yet. I was just thinking about all the ways life comes full circle. Thinking about the power of patience. Thinking that maybe, just maybe, the best way to fix a broken family is to let the ones who broke it see what it's like when the foundation gives way. You know how some moments in life just click, like fate handing you a tool you didn't even know you needed? That's how it felt the day I saw that for sale sign go up on the property right next to Brian and Claire's house. It was a 2-story brick home with a sagging fence, peeling paint, and a yard that hadn't seen a mower in months. Most people would have seen a money pit. Me, I saw opportunity. Not revenge yet, not then. Just a quiet way of saying, you can't get rid of me that easy. I remember pulling my Chevy to the curb that day. The engine coughed once before going quiet, and I just sat there staring at that house. The realtor, a woman named Denise, walked up, smiling. You looking for a fixer-upper, sir? I chuckled. You could say that. I'm looking for a place with sentimental value. She showed me around, pointing out every flaw, creaky floors, cracked windows, a leaky faucet. But to me, every imperfection was a challenge. Something I could fix with my own hands, something mine. When she asked if I was serious about buying, I looked her straight in the eye and said, more than you'll ever know. I signed the papers that same week, paid in cash. Years of sweat and busted knuckles built that money. Not luck, not inheritance. I'd saved it for Claire's future, but I guess her husband made it clear I wasn't part of that anymore. So I gave that money a new purpose. The day I pulled that moving truck up, I could feel eyes burning holes through the blinds next door. Brian was out in his driveway, watering the grass with that smug look of his. You know the kind. The look city folks get when they think they're better than you. He froze when he saw me. Frank, what's this? He said, his voice tight. I smiled like a man who just found peace. Just moving closer to family, Brian. He didn't say a word. Just stared at me like I'd lost my damn mind. Claire called later that evening, her voice trembling. Dad, what are you doing? You can't just move in next door, I said, calm as stone. I just wanted to be close, honey. I won't bother anyone. I promise. There was a pause, long, heavy silence on the other end. Then she hung up. That silence told me more than any argument ever could. Days turned into weeks. I kept to myself, fixing up the place little by little. Repainted the porch, replaced the mailbox, cleaned the gutters from the outside. I was just an old man keeping busy. But I saw things, heard things. Brian's car started coming home later and later. Claire looked tired, not the kind of tired a baby gives you, but the kind that comes from crying alone. Sometimes when I was out trimming the hedges, I'd hear them arguing through their open kitchen window. Words like trust, lies, and money floated out more than once. I didn't want to pry. But you don't need to pry when the truth starts shouting at you through the walls. One night, around 11 p.m., I was out on my porch, sipping coffee. Couldn't sleep. That's when I saw it. Brian's black Lexus pulled into the driveway, and another car followed behind. A silver BMW. A woman stepped out, not my daughter. They went inside fast. Lights stayed off, blinds half shut. But I saw enough. My heart sank. Not anger. Not yet. Just that hollow feeling when you realize someone's about to destroy the person you love most. I sat there until the lights went dark in their house. Didn't move. Didn't breathe much either. Next morning I saw Claire walking the baby stroller alone. Brian wasn't with her. He was gone before sunrise. That's when I knew. This wasn't just about pride anymore. This was about protecting my daughter, even if she didn't want me to. I started paying closer attention, not spying, just noticing. Patterns, movements, the kind of things a builder notices without trying. Brian's BMW guest started showing up twice a week. He'd delete texts when he thought no one was watching. Claire's smile, my little girl's smile, got smaller every day. Told myself to stay out of it. That's what she wanted. But every time I saw her wipe her eyes, I felt that promise I made on their porch burning inside me again. You'll regret pushing me out. Only now, I wasn't just thinking about proving a point. I was thinking about justice. That house next door wasn't just a new home. It was the perfect vantage point. From where I stood, I could see the truth, and I was about to make sure everyone else did, too, because if Brian thought I was done, he hadn't seen anything yet. You ever have that moment where the air just feels heavier? Like something bad's already happened, but nobody said it out loud yet? That's how it felt that evening on my porch. Warm Texas night, bugs chirping, beer cold in my hand, and Brian's voice slicing through the quiet like a saw through pine. He came out fast, phone pressed to his ear, pacing like a man with the devil on his heels. His tone wasn't just angry, it was panicked. I heard pieces float over the fence. She can't find out. I'll handle it. Just don't call here again. Every word made my stomach tighten. I didn't know who he was talking to and didn't care really, because the way he said it told me enough. That man wasn't arguing with a coworker. He was covering something up. He ended the call, stood there for a while staring into the darkness, then kicked a loose rock so hard it hit my fence. A few seconds later, his door slammed shut, and I remember thinking, you can build a strong house, but lies, they rot the foundation every time. Over the next week, I noticed things most people would have missed. That's the curse of being a builder. Your eyes catch details no one else sees. A silver car parked down the block at odd hours, a perfume scent on the wind. Not Claire's, never hers. Brian's shirt's wrinkled, collar stains he didn't have in the morning. Claire's smile faded. When she came out to get the mail, she'd stare at the ground like the weight of whatever was happening inside that house was pressing her down. Sometimes, she'd see me on the porch and force a half smile. But her eyes, those same eyes that used to light up when she saw me, they looked tired, defeated. I wanted to walk over to ask, honey, what's going on? But after what happened last time, I knew I had to let her come to me. It was a Friday, late afternoon, the kind of Texas heat that sticks to your skin. I was fixing the fence line when I saw her walking up my driveway. Her steps were slow, shaky. When she reached the porch, she didn't even knock, just said softly, Dad, can I sit? I nodded, didn't say a word. She sat down, face pale, eyes red from crying. I hadn't seen her look that broken since her mom passed. Then it came out, like a flood she'd been holding back for months. Brian's been lying to me, Dad, she said. Her voice cracked halfway through his name. About everything. His job, our money even where he's been going. She told me she'd found letters from the bank, missed payments, a notice about a credit line she didn't know existed, and an email, one she wasn't supposed to see, from a woman named Melanie. I asked him about it, she said, choking back tears. He said I was overreacting. Then he packed a bag and left for the weekend. She put her face in her hands and sobbed, and I just sat there, my heart cracking clean in half. All those years of protecting her, teaching her, building a life for her. And now she was trapped with a man who'd taken her trust and sold it for pocket change. That day, I realized something important. Brian hadn't just pushed me out of that family. He'd been slowly tearing her world apart. Brick by brick, every sneer, every cold word, every late night, it was all part of a pattern, and now, it was catching up to him. Claire said through her tears, I don't know what to do, Dad. We're behind on the house, and he won't tell me where the money's going. I feel like I married a stranger. I reached across the table, took her hand, and said quietly, You didn't marry a stranger, honey. You married a liar. She didn't look up. But her hand tightened around mine, and right there in that silence between us, I made another promise. No more standing on the sidelines. No more letting her fight alone. Brian might have thought he'd buried his secrets deep enough to stay safe, but I'd built enough foundations to know no secret stays buried forever. That night I couldn't sleep. I walked through my house listening to the old wood creak under my boots. Every sound reminded me of the homes I'd built, the families I'd helped start. And now, my own family was breaking. I looked out my kitchen window at their house, lights off, curtains drawn, and I thought that man's got no idea what's coming. See, betrayal doesn't always come with screaming or breaking glass. Sometimes, it's quiet, like termites in the walls. But once you spot the damage, there's no saving the structure, and Brian, he'd just made himself the target of a man who's got nothing left to lose, and a lifetime's worth of patience. I didn't slam a fist on the table. I didn't kick a door or holler like some movie I'd watched 100 times. I just leaned back, let that slow, tired smile come across my face, and looked at Claire the way I'd looked at her since she was 5 and scraped her knee on the stoop. "Let your old man handle this," I told her, quiet and steady. No big promises, no loud bravado. Just a calm that felt heavier than any shout I could make. Brian had no idea what he was up against. He thought I was just a grizzled contractor who hated city suits and polished shoes. What he didn't know was that I'd spent half my life building more than houses. I'd started a small contracting outfit back when copper was cheap and men still paid with a handshake. I knew paperwork. Not just the scraps you sign on a clipboard, but the kind of documents that hide in drawers until someone dies and the lawyers start looking. I knew ledgers, I knew invoices, and I knew how people dressed up ordinary things to look legitimate. A shell company, a consulting invoice, a miscellaneous expense line item. Those are the kinds of things men like Brian used to toss into an accounting folder and forget about. I remembered every one because I'd used them myself once to squeeze through a tight season. I also knew the kind of arrogance that thinks money can buy silence. The first thing I did was reach out. Not to lawyers, not to cameras, but to friends. Old-timers who owed me favors and knew how to be quiet when quiet mattered. I called Mike from the roofing crew. He still kept a pile of business cards in his glove box. I called Rosa, who ran a title office and had helped me wrestle with more than one crooked closing. I called Hank, who had a small accounting practice and a conscience bigger than his fee schedule. I told them the story, slow and measured, and I watched how their faces changed as the details landed. They didn't gaslight me or tell me to mind my own business. They listened because we'd built lives together where folks did what they said they would do. We started with the easy things, public records. A house is a house on paper until someone makes it more than that. I spent the afternoons at my kitchen table sipping coffee gone cold, looking up deeds and notices of default, tracking the flow of a name like you'd follow a rivulet after a storm. It wasn't glamorous, just tedious office-by-office legwork, but the small things add up, and in a week or two, pieces began to fit together in a way that made my stomach knot. There were transfers in and out of accounts that didn't make sense, invoices for consulting services that lined up with nights I'd seen the other car pull up in their driveway, and a pattern of credit opened under Claire's name without her knowledge. The numbers were there. The dates were there. Someone had been careful but not careful enough. I talked to the bank. Not in a loud, dramatic way, but like a man asking a manager about an old friend's account. I didn't threaten. I didn't make a scene. I asked questions that made the right people look. Sometimes you don't need to yell for someone to send a file to the right desk. Folks with decades of experience know how to make things move without fuss. I learned where the bills were going and how someone had built a mirage of income with a company that existed mostly on paper. The shell company was the kind of thing Brian must have thought was brilliant. It had a name that sounded respectable on a contract. Horizon Consulting or some such nonsense. The sort of name you'd give to a startup to make it smell like success. But when you pull back the drapery a bit, the man behind the name looks a lot less impressive. Who were the clients? Where were the project sites? Why were payments being routed in a pattern that suggested more concealment than profit? I took those questions to the people who cared to answer. Old friends who still owed me their ears and a young auditor at a firm who didn't like the smell of sloppy accounting. They dug. I watched as Brian's careful little house of cards revealed the gaps he'd tried to hide behind. All the while I kept my face, kept the routine. I fixed my yard, mowed the grass, painted the porch. I didn't want Claire to feel like I'd moved in to be a ghost at the dinner table. When she dropped by, I made coffee and tried to be the man she remembered. But at night, when the house went quiet and the world narrowed to the hum of the refrigerator and the tick of the clock, I spread photocopies out across my kitchen table like puzzle pieces. There were bank statements, receipts, a printed email or two Claire had saved and shown me that smelled of desperation and excuses. I made copies, labeled folders, wrote dates in small black ink. Call it old-fashioned if you want, but there's power in paper. There's honesty to an inked signature and a stamped date. Lies crumble faster when someone points at the ledger. I didn't race to the police. I didn't scream from the rooftops. I've spent enough time on job sites to know that the men who raise alarms early sometimes end up looking foolish if it turns out they jumped too soon. Strategy beats fury every time, so I sat on what I had and let the world move. I listened to people's own voices give me the next clue. A late-night call that ended abruptly when I walked outside. A package that showed up at the wrong time. A bank notice in the trash can that hadn't been shredded properly. People tell on themselves by habit more often than they do by force. There's an art to patience. My father taught me that. Not with words so much as with the way he'd stand in a storm, arms folded, waiting for it to blow over. He'd say, "Let it wear itself out." So I let Brian wear himself out. He didn't know I had eyes on things. He assumed we were as distant as the last argument on the porch. He didn't account for the idea that a man who's been building all his life learns to see foundations for what they are. Something you can shore up, or something you can watch crumble when the rot comes from within. As the evidence lined up, I started to think about leverage. Not bitterness, not humiliation, but leverage to protect Claire and the child she carried. I thought about letters and ledgers and how a well-placed stack of documents could change the trajectory of a man who thought honesty was optional. I thought about lawyers and quiet conversations with board members and the middle management types who like to keep their reputations clean. Mostly, I thought about the way my daughter's laugh had shrunk and how angry that made me in a way anger alone could never have done. I called Claire in and showed her, methodically and gently. I placed the first folder on the table and watched her fingers hover over the paper, like they were afraid to touch the truth. We went through it together on a Tuesday afternoon, sun cutting through the kitchen window and making dust motes dance. I didn't shout. I didn't point fingers. I simply laid out what the record said and what they meant. Her face went through 1,000 colors. Denial, confusion, relief, and then a quiet resolve that steadied her like a hand on her back. She told me she wanted to handle it herself at first, that she didn't want to be the daughter who ran to her father with every trouble. I told her she wasn't a child anymore. She was a woman who deserved the full truth before she made decisions that'd affect the rest of her life. We made a plan that was less dramatic than it was deliberate. We filed copies with the bank through a quiet contact of mine who didn't like loose ends and had a soft spot for people being taken for granted. We gathered evidence and made sure it would stand up if it had to. I talked to a lawyer. Again, not loudly, not to make a show. Just a man who'd done right by me before and owed me the same discretion I'd offered him on hard days. We had contingency plans, places for Claire and the baby to go if need be, a soft landing when the world got loud. We put safety nets in place before anybody tripped. I'll admit there was a small private satisfaction that shivered through me when I thought about it. Not joy at his ruin, no, but a satisfaction in knowing that Brian's arrogance had a price, and that flighty confidence he wore like a suit would one day feel heavy. Men like him forget that people they step on don't always crumble. Sometimes they learn how to lift a foundation and move it right beneath the man's feet. And so I waited. I fixed things around the house to keep my hands busy and my mind steady. I smiled when Claire came by, and I kept the folders locked in a drawer until the right moment. Patience, I'd learned the hard way, was a weapon sharper than the loudest shout. When a man builds his life on a lie, the slow work of uncovering it is the only justice that feels clean. I wasn't interested in theatrics. I wanted Claire safe, whole, and free from the man who'd decided our history was expendable. That was the plan in its quietest form. Gather, protect, and wait for his own momentum to carry him where his choices deserved to go. When that time came, everything we'd collected would speak for itself. I didn't have to shout. I only had to be ready. The evening the storm finally broke didn't look like much from the outside. It was one of those calm Texas twilights, where the air hangs still and the light bends orange across the rooftops. You could almost believe the world was at peace. But inside me there was a stillness before impact, that heavy calm that builders know right before demolition day. Everything looks intact, until you tap the wall and it collapses from within. It had been weeks since Claire's tears on my porch. Weeks of quiet moves and carefully laid traps. The evidence sat tucked away in a plain manila folder in my desk drawer, the kind of folder no one ever looks twice at. I'd made copies of everything. Statements, false invoices, credit lines, every scrap of proof that Brian had built his so-called success on fraud and deceit. All that was left was to let the truth come home to roost, so I did something unexpected. I invited them both to dinner. I called Claire first. My voice was steady, gentle. "Honey, I was thinking maybe we could all have dinner. You, Brian, and me. It's been too long." There was a pause. "Dad, are you sure that's a good idea?" I smiled into the phone, though she couldn't see it. "It's time," I said simply. When she agreed, I could hear a mix of fear and relief in her breath. She wanted closure, even if she didn't yet know what form it would take. As for Brian, I called him next. He sounded caught off guard, but he played along like always. "Dinner? Sure thing, Frank. Guess it's time to bury the hatchet, huh?" "Yeah," I said, voice calm as gravel. "Guess it is." I spent the day cooking the kind of meal my wife used to make. Roast beef, mashed potatoes, a little cornbread on the side. Not because I cared what Brian liked. No, I did it for Claire. I wanted her to feel something familiar, something safe, before the world shifted again. By the time they pulled up, the house smelled like home. Or at least, what home used to smell like before deceit settled in next door. Brian walked in first, wearing that fake grin that made my stomach twist. He carried a bottle of wine he probably thought would smooth things over. "Nice place you got here, Frank," he said, glancing around like he was inspecting a rental. I nodded, wiping my hands on a towel. "Yeah," I said, slow and steady. "Funny thing, and I own this house now." He laughed. That short, nervous kind of laugh people do when they're not sure if you're joking. "Guess you really can't stay away, huh?" "Guess not," I replied, meeting his eyes. He looked away first. They always do. We ate like nothing was wrong. Claire tried her best to keep the conversation light, asking about neighbors, the baby, even small talk about the weather. But the air around us was thick, and Brian kept tugging at his collar, glancing toward the window every few minutes as if he had somewhere better to be. I poured him a drink. Neat whiskey, same as I'd done for men I'd shaken hands with before they fell through on contracts. He took it gratefully, thinking it was an olive branch. By the time dessert came, I could see the mask slipping. His smile was tighter. His eyes darted when Claire asked about a bank. Notice that came in the mail. That's when I knew the time had come. I set my fork down, slow, deliberate. Then I reached under my chair and pulled out the folder, thick, organized, sealed with a rubber band. I slid it across the table. "I think you forgot some of your mail." "Son," I said, my voice low, steady, almost kind. He frowned, confused, and peeled back the band. Papers spilled out, one after another, printed and stamped. Account numbers, loan documents, transfers, emails. Every lie, every forged signature, every consulting fee that wasn't what it claimed to be. His face drained of color. The hand that held the papers trembled. Claire's eyes moved across the pages, her lips parting but no words coming out. I could see her piecing it together. The late nights, the arguments, the missing money. Every puzzle piece she'd been too kind to name now lay there in black and white. "Frank, what is this?" Brian's voice cracked, the confidence gone. I leaned back in my chair, calm as stone. "It's your work, Brian, your empire. Thought I'd keep a copy since you were using my daughter's name to build it." He looked at Claire, panic flashing across his face. "Claire, he's lying. He's trying to turn you against me." But she wasn't listening to him anymore. She was staring at the pages, scanning the dates, her breath growing shallow. "Brian," she whispered, you took out loans under my name?" He opened his mouth, closed it again. No words came. Just that hollow silence of a man watching the walls he built close in around him. I stood up, walked around the table slow, steady, the way I used to circle a beam before striking it down. "You told me to stay out of your family's life," I said, my voice low enough to make him flinch, but turns out I was right where I needed to be. He started to speak again, but the words stumbled out. Excuses, half-truths, nonsense. He begged, he promised to fix it, and Claire... She didn't say a word. She just sat there staring at the man she thought she'd known, her hands flat on the table. The color drained from her cheeks. Then after a long silence, she looked at him, really looked at him, and said quietly, "Get out." He blinked as if the sound didn't register. "Claire, please," she said it again, stronger this time. "Get out of my house." Her voice didn't tremble. It didn't crack. It carried the kind of weight only heartbreak can forge. Brian's eyes darted to me, but I didn't move. I just stared back, letting him see exactly what he'd earned. He stood up, stumbled, grabbed his keys. Papers fell to the floor, fluttering like white confetti. Except this wasn't celebration. This was burial. When the door slammed shut behind him, the house went silent. The kind of silence that feels sacred. The kind that means something ugly has finally died. Claire sat there for a long time, staring at nothing. I didn't touch her, didn't say a word. Sometimes words ruin a clean break. After a while she whispered, "You knew all along." "I suspected," I said. "But I needed you to see it for yourself." Her lip quivered, but she didn't cry. Not this time. The tears had already done their job. Now there was only resolve. That night I watched her walk back to her house, her head high, shoulders squared. She didn't look back, and I didn't need her to. She'd finally taken her power back. As for Brian, I never saw him again after that night. But word gets around in a town like ours. His company folded within weeks. Investigations followed. Whatever little empire he'd built on lies and stolen credit crumbled like wet drywall under its own weight. And I didn't have to lift a hammer. I sat on my porch the next morning, watching the sun rise over both our houses. The same porch where this all started, the day he told me to stay out. I took a slow sip of coffee and smiled, because I hadn't stayed out. I just waited until the right time to step in, and when I did, I didn't shout. I didn't fight, I simply built the truth. One document, one quiet plan, one long night at a time, until his whole empire couldn't stand on the lies he'd nailed together. That's the thing about old school lessons. They take longer, but they last forever. And that day Brian learned one, the hard way. The days that followed were a strange kind of quiet. Not the uneasy silence that used to hang in the air when Brian's car pulled into the driveway, but the gentle, healing quiet that comes when the storm has finally passed. The kind of silence where you can hear life trying to grow again from the ashes. When the truth broke, it didn't explode. It spread. Like wildfire under dry leaves, first the whispers at the bank, then the calls from the company's board, then the papers, the legal ones, the kind that come with stamps and signatures that mean the end of a man's false empire. Claire didn't cry that morning when she filed for divorce. She walked into that courthouse in a plain gray coat, hair tied back, eyes clear and steady. I stood beside her in the hallway, watching her hand move as she signed her name. There was no hesitation, no tremor, just a clean, certain line drawn across the past. It was over. The lawyers didn't take long. The investigation had already begun after the documents I'd passed along found their way into the right hands. The bank froze every account tied to Brian's consulting company, and the auditors tore through his records like wolves through a carcass. Within a week, his business partners distanced themselves. Within 2, the company let him go. Pending investigation, as they like to call it. He went from handshakes and smiles to cold shoulders and locked doors almost overnight. Every man who once called him brother now avoided his eye. That's how justice really works sometimes, not through vengeance or violence, but through exposure. Through truth. Within a month, Brian packed up what little he had left. No job, no car, and the bank had repossessed it. No house either. That was in Claire's name now. He left town one rainy morning, a single duffel bag slung over his shoulder, head down, no destination. I didn't go out to watch him leave. I didn't need to, because the thing about men like Brian is, they don't just lose what they stole. They lose what they were trying to pretend they had. After he was gone, the house across the street sat empty for a while. The blinds stayed closed and the grass grew long. But across my porch, life began to move again. Claire came over every morning with my grandson in her arms, sleepy-eyed but determined. She was different now, quieter, stronger, with that kind of peace that only comes from finally knowing the truth. We started small. I fixed her credit piece by piece, calling old contacts and untangling the mess Brian had left behind. We opened a new account in her name this time, just hers. I helped her budget, helped her plan. We painted the nursery together, a soft blue that made the room feel like a sky waiting for sunlight. Some evenings, after the baby was asleep, we'd sit on the porch, the same one where I'd once watched everything fall apart, and talk about little things. Her work, the kid, the garden she wanted to start come spring. She'd laugh sometimes now, a real laugh, not the nervous one she used to wear when she was trying to keep the peace. I never told her how proud I was every time I heard that sound. I just listened. One night, months after the dust had finally settled, she came into the kitchen while I was cleaning up. The baby monitor sat on the counter, soft, static humming through it. She leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, studying me with those same curious eyes she had as a kid. The kind that always wanted to understand, not just know. "Dad," she said after a while, "you could have ruined him completely. I mean, you had everything, the evidence, the proof. You could have made sure he never worked again, never recovered." I looked up from the sink and met her eyes. She wasn't accusing me. She was genuinely asking. I dried my hands on a towel, took a slow breath, and smiled that small, tired smile she knew too well. "Because revenge isn't about destroying someone," I said. "It's about showing them you didn't need to stoop to their level to win." She frowned slightly, as if weighing it in her mind. I leaned on the counter, letting the quiet fill the space between us. "Men like Brian," I continued, "they build everything out of lies, their pride, their money, their charm. When the lies collapse, that's all the punishment they need. You don't have to set the fire when their own house is already made of matchsticks." For a moment she didn't speak. Then she nodded slowly, her eyes glistening. "You're a better man than he ever deserved, Dad." I smiled again, this time softer. "No, sweetheart. I'm just a man who learned that justice isn't loud. It doesn't need applause or headlines. Sometimes it's just peace, knowing you did right by the people you love." She came over and hugged me then, her head resting against my shoulder. It was the kind of hug that said everything words couldn't. "Thank you, I'm safe now, it's finally over." In the months that followed, life found a rhythm again. Claire got a new job, honest work that she loved. She saved every penny, bought a small home not far from mine, and filled it with laughter. My grandson started walking, then talking, and soon the house was filled with the sound of tiny footsteps and giggles. And every time I looked at that kid, his wide eyes, his mother's determination, I thought about the cycle that had finally been broken. Brian had taught me a lot without meaning to. He taught me that revenge doesn't always come from anger. Sometimes it comes from patience, from letting the truth take its time to grow teeth. Justice, real justice, isn't the sound of someone begging for mercy. It's the silence afterward, when you know they've been stripped of everything false, and what's left is just the truth staring them down. One evening, long after Claire and the little one had gone home, I sat on the porch again, the same coffee cup in my hand. The sun dipped low behind the trees, setting the sky on fire. Across the street, the house that once held so much deceit was dark and empty, its for sale sign tilted in the dirt. I thought about Brian, wherever he'd ended up, and hoped maybe that somewhere out there he'd finally learned what honesty costs when you lose it. But that wasn't my burden anymore. Mine was here, on this porch, with my daughter safe, my grandson sleeping, and a peace I hadn't felt in years settling over me like evening air. Some men chase revenge their whole lives, thinking it'll fill the hole inside them. But me, I learned that the sweetest revenge is peace, the kind that comes after doing what's right and walking away without looking back. And as the crickets started their song and the stars began to show, I realized something simple, something true. I hadn't just built homes all my life. I'd built people. I'd built resilience, and this time I'd helped rebuild my daughter. That was justice enough. Time has a strange way of healing things. Not all at once, not in some grand cinematic way, but slowly, quietly, like a wound scabbing over when you stop picking at it. Months rolled by, and each one carried a little more light than the last. The house next door, Brian and Claire's old place, still stood there like a ghost of what used to be. The for sale sign leaned crooked in the yard, faded by the Texas sun. The grass had grown long, the shutters hung slightly off kilter, and the mailbox still had their name faintly scratched across it. Reynolds. Every morning, when I stepped onto my porch with my cup of black coffee, I'd glance at that house and feel a strange mix of things: sadness, relief, maybe even gratitude. Because that house had been the battlefield. It was where I'd lost my daughter for a while, where I'd stood on the porch being told to stay out of their life. And yet it was also the place that taught me patience, discipline, and what real strength looks like. Not the kind that swings fists or shouts loud, but the kind that waits, watches, and lets truth do its work. The neighborhood seemed to breathe easier now. Folks waved more, kids played in the cul-de-sac again, and every so often someone would stop by my porch just to chat about the weather, the barbecue joint down the road, the latest high school game. The quiet kind of life I'd always wanted had finally come back around, but this time it felt earned. Claire had moved into her own place by then, a small, cozy home just a few streets over. Not fancy but warm. She'd painted the walls herself, hung family photos, even built a little garden in the backyard where my grandson liked to dig for worms more than plant anything. Sometimes I'd drive over after work just to help her fix a loose hinge or install a new light. Not because she needed me to. She'd grown strong enough to handle just about anything, but because it felt good to be wanted again, not tolerated. One afternoon, I was sitting on my porch when Claire pulled up with my grandson in tow. He came running up the steps, tiny cowboy boots thudding against the wood, his laughter echoing through the still air. He was carrying a toy hammer and a plastic bright red, and yelled, "Grandpa, I'm going to build houses just like you." That right there, that single sentence, hit me harder than any kind of revenge ever could. I chuckled, ruffled his hair, and said, "You do that, buddy. Just remember, build 'em strong and build 'em honest." He nodded solemnly, like I'd just given him the secret to the universe, and ran off chasing the dog around the yard. As the sun started to set, I leaned back in my chair and watched the world around me settle. The cicadas hummed their summer song, a warm breeze rustled through the trees, and, for the first time in years, my heart felt steady, like it wasn't carrying any more unfinished business, you see. People think revenge means rage, fire, shouting, getting even. They imagine slamming doors and raised voices, not quiet porches and slow sunsets. But that's not what real revenge is. Real revenge is peace. It's waking up and realizing the people who tried to break you no longer get to live in your head rent-free. It's sitting across from what once hurt you, that house, that memory, and feeling nothing but calm. It's clarity. It's looking at the world and seeing how everything eventually finds balance, how the universe doesn't need your help to hand out karma. Sometimes, I still catch myself glancing at that old house next door. It's empty, sure, but it's not haunted anymore. It's just a reminder of what once was and what's finally over. Funny thing is, some evenings I imagine someone new moving in. Maybe a young family or an older couple looking for a quiet place to start over. I picture myself walking over, shaking hands, welcoming them to the neighborhood. No grudges, no ghosts, just another fresh start, the way life's meant to go. I've learned something over these years. Revenge isn't about proving someone wrong. It's about proving yourself right. It's about reclaiming your peace, not by tearing someone else down, but by standing tall in the life they said you couldn't have. I didn't win by outsmarting Brian. I won by outlasting him, by being patient, by trusting time, by believing that what's done in the dark eventually walks into the light. And as I sit there on my porch, my grandson's laughter fading into the evening air, I realize that that's all the justice I ever needed. Sometimes revenge isn't loud. It's quiet. It's steady. It's sitting in a creaky old chair on a peaceful Texas porch with the ghosts gone, the air clean, and the sound of life, real life, carrying on next door. Because in the end, peace isn't the absence of conflict. It's the reward for surviving it. There comes a point in a man's life when you stop measuring victory by who kneels first, and start measuring it by how calm your heart feels when the dust settles. I used to think strength was about standing your ground, raising your voice, proving your worth to people who refuse to see it. But time teaches you different. It teaches you that real strength doesn't shout. It doesn't need an audience. It just endures. When Brian told me to stay out of this family, I thought I'd lost everything. My daughter, my place in her world, my sense of purpose. For a while, I carried that pain like a stone in my chest, heavy and cold. I kept replaying his words, wondering what I could have done differently, what I could have said to make him respect me. But the truth is, you can't make a man with no roots understand what family really means. You don't fight every battle with fists or fury. Some wars are won with patience, the quiet kind of patience that looks like doing nothing on the outside while you rebuild everything inside. That's what I did. I didn't yell. I didn't strike back. I built. I waited. And I let truth take its time. Because here's the thing. If someone tries to push you out, don't fight them. Just outgrow them. Step into a bigger life. One so honest and steady that their smallness can't touch it. Brian thought he could erase me from my daughter's life, cut me out like an old photograph that didn't fit the frame he wanted. But that's the thing about roots. You can't pull them up so easily. The deeper the love, the harder it is to kill. And in the end, it wasn't me who disappeared. It was him. He's the one erased from his own life now. No job, no family, no name worth keeping. But me? I wake up every morning to the sound of my grandson laughing, to the smell of coffee brewing in a kitchen I built with my own 2 hands. I walk through a house filled with peace, not pride. And when I look at my daughter, I see a woman who's stronger because she finally saw what love really looks like. Not control, not silence, but protection, even from afar. That's the kind of legacy a man should leave. Revenge isn't about payback. It's about taking back your peace. It's about reclaiming your dignity from the people who tried to steal it. It's about saying, you don't get to decide how my story ends. When I bought that house next door, it wasn't just about defiance. It was about reclaiming space, whether emotional, spiritual, and literal. It was about proving to myself that no one could exile me from the life I'd built, not while I was still breathing. Over time, I realized something simple, something I wish I'd known when I was younger. You don't have to burn bridges to move on. You just have to stop crossing the ones that lead nowhere. I didn't destroy Brian's life. I just stopped letting him control mine. The rest? Karma took care of that. Now, when I sit on my porch and watch the sun go down behind the old oak trees, I feel something I haven't felt in years. Peace. Not the kind that comes after you win, but the kind that comes when you finally stop fighting battles that don't deserve you. I think about all the men out there, fathers, brothers, husbands, who get pushed aside, told they're too much, too involved, or old-fashioned. I want to tell them this. Don't let anyone shame you for caring too hard. Don't let anyone make you feel small for standing by the people you love. Just don't lose yourself in trying to prove your worth to people who'll never see it. Sometimes the best revenge is simply being there when they thought you couldn't be. Sometimes it's smiling from the porch next door while the life they built on lies collapses quietly in the distance. So here's what I learned. The real lesson in all this. You can't control what people do to you. You can only control what you do next. You can choose to let bitterness take root, or you can choose to turn that pain into purpose. Me, I chose peace. I chose to rebuild. I chose to stay steady until the truth rose up on its own. And in doing that, I didn't just win, I outlasted. Because in the end, revenge isn't fire or fury. It's peace, earned, quiet, and lasting. That's my story. The story of how one man's arrogance built my quiet victory, and how a father's love, steady, patient, and unbreakable, became stronger than betrayal itself.